Sarah Martinez had never imagined her life would come to this. Just 2 years ago, she had been working as a nurse at the local hospital, living in a small but comfortable apartment with her husband Miguel. They had been so happy when Emma was born, their first child, a perfect little girl with bright eyes and Miguel's gentle smile. But life has a way of changing everything in an instant. The accident happened on a rainy Tuesday morning. Miguel was driving to work when a drunk driver ran a red light and crashed into his car. The doctors said he died instantly, that he didn't suffer. Sarah tried to find comfort in those words, but they felt empty when she was left alone with a 3-month-old baby and medical bills that grew higher every day. Without Miguel's income, Sarah couldn't keep up with the rent. The hospital where she worked had to let her go during budget cuts, and finding a new job became impossible when she couldn't afford childcare for Emma. One thing led to another, and soon they were living in their car. When winter came early and harsh, even the car became too dangerous. Now, in this cold, empty building, Sarah felt the weight of every decision that had led them here. She had tried so hard to be strong, to find a way out, but sometimes life pushes you down so hard that getting back up seems impossible. "I'm sorry, baby girl," she whispered to Emma, whose breathing had become slow and shallow. "Mama tried her best. I tried so hard." The temperature outside had dropped to below zero, and the wind seemed to cut right through the walls of the old warehouse. Sarah's fingers were so cold she could barely feel them anymore. She pulled Emma even closer, trying to share what little warmth was left in her body. As the hours passed, Sarah felt herself becoming drowsy. She knew this was dangerous, that falling asleep in this cold could mean never waking up, but she was so tired. Her body ached from days of walking, of carrying Emma, of trying to stay warm. The drowsiness felt almost peaceful, like sinking into a warm bath after a long, hard day. Just for a little while, she told herself. Just a few minutes to rest. But as Sarah's eyes grew heavy, she knew deep down that this might be the end. She kissed Emma's forehead and held her tight, whispering every "I love you" she had left to give. David Chun had been driving home from his late shift at the factory when he saw the broken streetlight flickering near the old Morrison warehouse. Something made him slow down and look closer. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the memory of his own grandfather, who used to say that angels sometimes disguise themselves as people who need help. David had grown up poor himself. His family had come to America from Taiwan when he was just 5 years old, and his parents had worked 3 jobs each just to keep food on the table. He remembered cold nights when the heat got turned off, remembered the feeling of going to bed hungry. Now, at 35, he had a good job and a warm apartment, but he never forgot where he came from. As he parked his truck and grabbed his flashlight, David wasn't sure what he was looking for. The warehouse had been abandoned for years, and most people avoided it. But something told him to check, to make sure no one was in trouble. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness as he stepped carefully through the broken doorway. The wind was fierce inside the building, and he could see his breath in the cold air. He was about to turn back when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it. It was the soft sound of someone crying, barely audible over the wind. David followed the sound, his heart beating faster with each step. In the far corner of the warehouse, his flashlight found them. A young woman holding a baby, both of them so still that for a moment he feared he was too late. "Hey!" he called out, rushing over to them. "Hey, are you okay?" Sarah's eyes fluttered open, but she seemed unable to focus. Her lips were blue, and her whole body was shaking. The baby in her arms wasn't moving at all. David didn't hesitate. He had taken first aid classes at work, and he knew hypothermia when he saw it. He immediately took off his heavy winter coat and wrapped it around both Sarah and Emma, then pulled out his phone to call 911. "This is an emergency," he told the dispatcher. "I found a woman and baby with severe hypothermia at the old Morrison warehouse on 5th Street. They need an ambulance right now." While waiting for help to arrive, David did everything he could to warm them up. He rubbed Sarah's hands and feet, trying to get her blood circulating. He checked Emma's pulse and was relieved to find it was still beating, though very weak. "What's your name?" he asked Sarah gently. Sarah," she managed to whisper through chattering teeth. "My baby is my baby," She's alive, David told her firmly. You're both going to be okay. Help is coming. David took off his own sweater and added it to the layers covering them. He sat close to share his body heat, talking to Sarah to keep her conscious. You're very brave, he told her. You kept your baby alive. You did everything right. Tears began to flow down Sarah's face. I thought we were going to die. Not on my watch, David said with a gentle smile. My name is David, and I'm not going anywhere until I know you're both safe. The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later, though it felt like hours to David. He rode with them to the hospital, holding Sarah's hand as the paramedics worked to warm her and Emma up slowly and safely. At the hospital, David waited in the emergency room while the doctors examined both mother and child. A nurse came out after what felt like forever and told him that both Sarah and Emma were going to be okay. They had been very close to severe hypothermia, but David had found them just in time. Can I see them? David asked. Are you family? The nurse asked. David hesitated. No, I'm the one who found them. I just want to make sure they're really okay. The nurse smiled. Room 204. But they're both sleeping right now. David walked quietly into the hospital room. Sarah was lying in the bed with several warm blankets piled on top of her. Emma was in a small hospital crib next to the bed, also bundled up and sleeping peacefully. Both of them had color back in their faces, and their breathing looked normal and strong. A doctor came in and introduced himself as Dr. Williams. You saved their lives, he told David. Another hour or two in those conditions, and we might not have been able to help them. David felt a weight in his chest. What's going to happen to them now? Dr. Williams looked concerned. Well, that's complicated. The mother told us they've been homeless for several weeks. Social services will probably want to get involved, especially with the baby. What does that mean? It means they might separate them. Put the baby in foster care while the mother gets back on her feet. It's not ideal, but without a stable place to live or income, David felt his heart sink. After everything Sarah had been through to keep her baby safe, the thought of them being separated seemed cruel. Doctor, David said slowly, what if I could help them? I mean, I have a steady job and an apartment. Is there some way I could help keep them together? Dr. Williams looked surprised. You don't even know them. I know they deserve a chance, David replied. Everyone deserves a chance. When Sarah woke up the next morning, she felt confused and disoriented. The last thing she remembered clearly was the terrible cold and holding Emma in that empty building. Now she was in a warm, clean hospital bed, and Emma was sleeping peacefully nearby. A nurse came in to check on them and explained what had happened. A man named David found you both last night. He probably saved your lives. Sarah felt tears coming to her eyes. She had prayed for help, and somehow it had come. Later that morning, David came to visit. Sarah was sitting up in bed, holding Emma, who was awake and looking much healthier. Thank you, Sarah said as soon as she saw him. I don't know how to thank you enough. David sat down in the chair next to her bed. You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad you're both okay. They talked for a while and Sarah told David her story. She explained about Miguel's death, about losing her job and her apartment, about the impossible choice between keeping Emma with her on the streets or giving her up to foster care. I kept thinking that maybe Emma would be better off without me, Sarah said, crying softly. Maybe she'd be safer with someone who could actually take care of her. No, David said firmly. I saw how you protected her last night. You risked everything to keep her safe. She needs her mother. David took a deep breath and made a decision that would change all their lives. Sarah, I have an idea. I know we just met, but I want to help you. I have a 2-bedroom apartment, and I live alone. What if you and Emma came to stay with me, just until you can get back on your feet? Sarah stared at him in shock. I can't ask you to do that. You don't even know us. You're not asking. I'm offering. Look, I know it sounds crazy, but I believe that sometimes people come into our lives for a reason. My grandfather always taught me that when you have the power to help someone, you should. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, holding Emma close. The offer seemed too good to be true, and she had learned to be careful about trusting people. But there was something in David's eyes, a kindness that reminded her of Miguel. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you want to help strangers?" David thought about how to explain it. "When I was a kid, my family went through some really hard times. There were people who helped us when they didn't have to. A neighbor who brought us food when my parents were working late. A teacher who bought me school supplies when my family couldn't afford them. Small acts of kindness that made a huge difference." He paused, looking at Emma, who was staring up at him with curious eyes. "I guess I believe that we're all connected somehow. That what happens to you matters to me even if we just met. And besides," he added with a smile, "my apartment is too quiet anyway." 3 days later, Sarah and Emma left the hospital with David. Sarah felt nervous and grateful at the same time as they drove to his apartment building. She kept expecting him to change his mind, to realize what a huge commitment he was making to two people he barely knew. David's apartment was small but comfortable, with large windows that let in lots of natural light. He had already prepared the second bedroom for them, buying a crib for Emma and making sure Sarah had everything she needed. "This is beautiful," Sarah said, looking around. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and warm and safe. Everything they had been missing for so long. "The kitchen is fully stocked," David told her. "Make yourselves at home." Really, that first week was strange for all of them. Sarah wasn't used to accepting help from anyone, and David wasn't used to sharing his space. But slowly they began to find a rhythm. David would leave for work in the morning, and Sarah would spend the day taking care of Emma and trying to find ways to help around the apartment. She cooked dinner for them and kept the place clean, insisting that she wanted to contribute somehow. In the evenings, they would talk while David played with Emma, who seemed to love the attention. Sarah told David about her life before everything fell apart, about her work as a nurse, about Miguel and their dreams for the future. David shared stories about his childhood, about coming to America and working hard to build a better life. "I always wanted kids," David admitted one evening as he held Emma, who had fallen asleep in his arms. "But I never found the right person to have them with. Work kind of took over my life." Sarah watched him with Emma and felt something she hadn't expected. David was so gentle with her daughter, so patient and caring. Emma seemed to feel safe with him, which meant everything to Sarah. "She likes you," Sarah said softly. "I like her too. Both of you." There was something in the way he said it that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. She hadn't thought about romance since Miguel died, but there was something about David that made her feel things she thought she'd never feel again. As weeks turned into months, their temporary arrangement began to feel more permanent. Sarah found a part-time job at a local clinic, working as a medical assistant. It didn't pay as much as her old nursing job, but it was a start. David insisted she save her money instead of paying rent, saying that having them there was payment enough. "You're not a burden," he told her when she worried about taking advantage of his kindness. "You're family now." The word family hit Sarah hard. She had felt so alone since Miguel died, like she and Emma were adrift in the world with no one to care about them. But David had given them something precious, a sense of belonging. Emma was thriving. She had started crawling and was pulling herself up on furniture, babbling happily and reaching for David whenever he came home from work. Sarah loved watching them together. David would get down on the floor and play with Emma for hours, making silly faces and reading her stories. One evening, while they were having dinner, Emma said her first word, "Dada." She was looking right at David when she said it. Sarah felt her heart stop. Emma had never known her real father, and now she was calling David Dada. Sarah looked at David, worried about how he would react. But David's face lit up with joy. "Did you hear that?" She said, "Dada." He picked Emma up and spun her around gently, both of them laughing. Later that night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah and David talked about what had happened. "I'm sorry," Sarah said. "I don't know why she said that. I can try to teach her not to." "Don't," David interrupted. "Please don't. I like it. Is that okay?" Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "David, you've done so much for us already. You don't have to pretend to be her father too." "I'm not pretending," David said quietly. I love her like she's my own daughter. I love both of you." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah felt her heart racing. She had been fighting her feelings for David for months, telling herself that she was just grateful, that she couldn't possibly be falling in love again so soon after losing Miguel. But looking at David now, seeing the honesty in his eyes, she couldn't deny it anymore. "I love you too," she whispered. David reached across the table and took her hand. "Really? Really? I tried not to. I felt guilty, like I was betraying Miguel's memory. But you're not trying to replace him. You're you. And you're wonderful." That night, for the first time since the warehouse, Sarah felt truly warm from the inside out. Life wasn't perfect, of course. There were challenges as their relationship deepened and they learned to navigate being a family. Sarah sometimes had nightmares about that night in the warehouse, waking up in a panic thinking she and Emma were still in danger. David would hold her until the fear passed, reminding her that they were safe now. David had his own struggles too. He had lived alone for so long that sharing his space and his life wasn't always easy. Sometimes he felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of caring for Sarah and Emma, wondering if he was doing enough or if he was good enough to be the father Emma needed. But they worked through these challenges together, talking openly about their fears and supporting each other through difficult moments. Emma continued to grow and thrive. She took her first steps in their living room, walking from Sarah to David while they both cheered. She learned to say "Mama" and would clap her hands when David came home from work. She was a happy, healthy toddler who clearly felt loved and secure. Sarah's confidence grew along with Emma's. She enrolled in online classes to get her nursing license updated and eventually found a full-time job at a hospital across town. Having stable income and a stable home gave her a sense of pride and independence she had thought she'd lost forever. One day, almost a year after that night in the warehouse, Sarah was cleaning out some old boxes when she found a photo of Miguel. For a moment, she felt the familiar pang of grief, but then she realized something had changed. The grief was still there, but it no longer felt crushing. Instead, it felt like love for the good memories they had shared and gratitude for the gift Miguel had given her and Emma. She showed the photo to David that evening. "I want Emma to know about her biological father," she said. "I want her to know that Miguel loved her, even though he never got to meet her." David nodded. "Of course, he's part of her story. He's part of what made her who she is. And I want her to know that she's lucky enough to have two fathers who love her, one who loved her before she was born, and one who chose to love her every day." David pulled Sarah close and kissed her forehead. "She's lucky to have a mother who fought so hard to keep her safe, and who found a way to build a beautiful life for her." 2 years after that cold night in the warehouse, David proposed to Sarah in the same park where they often took Emma to play. It was spring, and the trees were covered in new green leaves. Emma was chasing butterflies while Sarah pushed her on the swings. "Sarah," David said, getting down on one knee, "2 years ago, I found you and Emma when you needed help the most. But the truth is, you saved me too. You taught me what it means to be part of a family, what it means to love someone more than yourself." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as David pulled out a small ring box. "Will you marry me? Will you let me be Emma's dad officially? And will you give me the honor of being your husband?" Through happy tears, Sarah said yes. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony with just a few close friends. Emma, now a chatty 2-year-old, served as the flower girl, dropping rose petals everywhere and making everyone laugh. David officially adopted Emma after the wedding, and she became Emma Chin. At the adoption hearing, the judge asked Emma who David was, and she proudly announced, "That's my daddy." That night, as they tucked Emma into bed in their new house, they had saved up and bought a small home with a yard where Emma could play. Sarah reflected on how much their lives had changed. "Do you ever think about that night?" Sarah asked David as they sat on their back porch, watching fireflies dance in their garden. "Every day," David said. "It was the night everything changed. The night we became a family." "I used to have nightmares about it," Sarah said. "But now I think it was the night I learned what miracles look like. They don't always come with bright lights and angels. Sometimes they come as a man with a flashlight who decides to check on strangers because his grandfather taught him to help people. David smiled and pulled her closer. Your miracle was your own strength. You kept Emma alive through sheer force of will and love. You never gave up on her. We saved each other, Sarah said simply. From inside the house, they could hear Emma talking to herself in her crib, probably telling her stuffed animals about her day. She was healthy, happy, and secure, surrounded by love, and completely unaware of how close she had come to a very different life. 5 years later, Sarah and David welcomed their second child, a son they named Miguel David Chun, honoring both of Emma's fathers. Emma was 7 years old and completely devoted to her baby brother, insisting on helping with everything from feeding him to reading him bedtime stories. Sarah had returned to full-time nursing and was working in the pediatric ward at the children's hospital. David had been promoted to supervisor at his factory and was taking night classes to get his engineering degree. They had built a good, stable life together. But they never forgot how they came to be a family. Every year on the anniversary of that night in the warehouse, they would visit the hospital and make a donation to help other families in crisis. They also volunteered at the local homeless shelter, serving meals and helping people find resources. Why do we do this every year? Emma asked one day as they were serving food at the shelter. Sarah knelt down to Emma's level. Because once upon a time, Mommy and you needed help, and a very kind man decided to help us even though he didn't know us. Now we try to help other people the same way. Like Daddy helped us? Just like Daddy helped us. Emma nodded solemnly and went back to handing out sandwiches, taking her job very seriously. That night, as they drove home, David reached over and took Sarah's hand. No regrets? He asked, like he did every year. Only one, Sarah said. And David's heart skipped a beat until she continued with a smile. I regret that it took us so long to find each other. David laughed and squeezed her hand. In the back seat, Emma was telling baby Miguel about all the people they had helped that day, and Miguel was responding with happy baby babbles. This was their life now, full of love, laughter, and the knowledge that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Sarah had closed her eyes expecting to die in the cold, but instead she had awakened to a new life warmed by love. And every single day, she was grateful for the stranger who had become her family, for the second chance she never thought she'd get, and for the reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope can find a way to survive. The little girl who had almost frozen to death in her mother's arms was now a happy child who knew she was loved, protected, and cherished. And the woman who thought she had failed as a mother had discovered that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply refusing to give up. In the end, they had all saved each other. 10 years had passed since that frozen night when Sarah thought she would die holding her baby. Emma was now 12 years old, a bright and confident girl who loved soccer and wanted to be a doctor like her mom. Miguel, their second child, was 5 and full of energy, always asking questions and following his big sister everywhere. Sarah was now head nurse in the pediatric unit, and David had finished his engineering degree and started his own small consulting business. They had moved to a larger house with a big backyard where the children could play safely. But one autumn evening, as Sarah was driving home from work, she took a wrong turn and found herself on 5th Street, right in front of the old Morrison warehouse where David had found them all those years ago. She parked the car and sat there for a moment, staring at the building. It looked even more run down now, with boards covering most of the windows and weeds growing through cracks in the concrete. But it was still standing, still sheltering people from the wind and rain. Sarah got out of the car and walked slowly toward the entrance. She hadn't been back here since that night, and she felt her heart beating faster as memories flooded back. Inside the warehouse, she could see that other people had used it for shelter over the years. There were old blankets in corners, empty food cans, and signs that people had tried to make small fires to stay warm. In the very corner where she and Emma had almost died, someone had left a small pile of clothes and a baby bottle. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Another mother had been here with her child, facing the same desperate situation Sarah had faced 10 years ago. She pulled out her phone and called David. "I'm at the warehouse," she said when he answered. "The warehouse? Sarah, What are you doing there? I don't know. I ended up here. David, there are signs that other families have been here. Other mothers with babies trying to survive the cold. David was quiet for a moment. I'll be right there. 20 minutes later, David arrived with both children. Emma and Miguel had heard stories about the warehouse, but they had never seen it before. This is where you found us? Emma asked, looking around the empty space. Right in that corner, David said, pointing to where Sarah was standing. Emma walked over to her mother and hugged her tightly. I'm glad you didn't give up, Mama. I'm glad your daddy found us, Sarah replied, stroking Emma's hair. Miguel, who was too young to fully understand what had happened, was more interested in exploring the building. Can we fix this place up? He asked. Make it warm for people who don't have homes? David and Sarah looked at each other, and Sarah saw the same idea forming in David's eyes that was growing in her own heart. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and David couldn't stop thinking about Miguel's innocent question. They talked about it during dinner, during their evening walks, and late at night when the children were asleep. We could really do something, Sarah said one evening. We have the resources now. We could turn that warehouse into a real shelter. David nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. I could handle the construction side, make sure it's safe and warm. You could manage the medical care and family services. It would be a lot of work, Sarah said, and expensive. But it could save lives, David replied. Lives like yours and Emma's. They spent months researching, planning, and meeting with city officials. They discovered that the warehouse was owned by the city and had been abandoned for years. The city was willing to sell it to them for a very low price if they could prove they would use it to help homeless families. Sarah and David used their savings, took out loans, and started a fundraising campaign in their community. David's engineering background helped him create plans for converting the warehouse into a safe, warm shelter with separate areas for families, a medical clinic, a children's play area, and a kitchen where volunteers could prepare meals. Emma and Miguel became their biggest supporters. Emma organized bake sales at school and convinced her soccer team to donate part of their fundraising money to the shelter project. Miguel, despite being only 5, would tell everyone he met about how his parents were building a house for people who didn't have homes. The local newspaper wrote an article about their project, and donations started coming in from people all over the city. Many of the donors were people who had been helped by Sarah and David over the years, former patients, co-workers, and friends who had been touched by their kindness. Construction took over a year. David worked on the project every weekend and many evenings after work. Sarah coordinated with social services, local charities, and medical suppliers to make sure they would have everything they needed to help families. Emma and Miguel helped whenever they could. Emma painted cheerful murals on the walls of the children's area, and Miguel helped sort donated clothes and toys. The whole family became involved in making the shelter a place where people would feel welcomed and dignified, not just housed. It's not just about having a roof over their heads, Sarah explained to Emma one day as they were organizing the medical supplies. It's about treating people with respect and helping them get back on their feet. Like Daddy did for us, Emma said. Exactly like Daddy did for us. During construction, they faced many challenges. There were delays with permits, problems with plumbing, and times when they ran out of money and had to wait for more donations. But every time they felt discouraged, they would remember that night 10 years ago and find the strength to keep going. David's co-workers at the factory volunteered their time to help with construction. Sarah's colleagues at the hospital organized medical supply drives. Even Emma's teachers contributed by organizing school supply collections for the children who would stay at the shelter. The most emotional moment came when they were painting the main entrance. Sarah had chosen a warm yellow color, and as she painted, she remembered the cold, gray darkness of that winter night. This is where hope begins, she said to David as they worked side by side. No, David replied, smiling at her. Hope began when you refused to give up on Emma. This is just where hope gets a chance to grow. The Morrison Family Shelter opened on a sunny Saturday morning in April, exactly 11 years after David had found Sarah and Emma in the warehouse. The timing wasn't planned. It just worked out that way, as if the universe was completing a circle. The opening ceremony was simple but meaningful. Sarah and David spoke about their vision for the shelter, and Emma read a poem she had written about helping others. Miguel cut the ribbon with oversized scissors, grinning from ear to ear. The first family to stay at the shelter was a young couple with twin toddlers who had been living in their car for 3 weeks after losing their apartment. The mother, Maria, reminded Sarah so much of herself, scared, exhausted, but still fighting to protect her children. "Welcome," Sarah said as she showed Maria and her family to their room. "You're safe here. We're going to help you get back on your feet." Maria started crying. "I was so scared we'd have to sleep in the car again tonight." "Not anymore," Sarah said firmly. "Not on our watch." The shelter could house up to 12 families at a time, and within a month it was full. David managed the day-to-day operations while continuing his engineering consulting work part-time. Sarah worked at the hospital during the day and spent evenings at the shelter, providing medical care and counseling to the families. Emma and Miguel visited the shelter every day after school. Emma helped tutor the children with their homework, and Miguel played with the younger kids, sharing his toys and making sure everyone felt included. The shelter became more than just a place to sleep. It was a community where families supported each other, where children could play safely, and where people could begin to rebuild their lives with dignity. One evening, about 6 months after the shelter opened, Sarah was working late in the medical clinic when she heard a commotion in the main area. She went to investigate and found Emma talking excitedly to a teenage girl who had just arrived with her mother. "Mom," Emma called out. "This is Jessica. She's 15, just like I was when you and Dad got married. And guess what? She wants to be a nurse too." Sarah smiled and introduced herself to Jessica and her mother, Linda. They had been staying in their car for 2 weeks after Linda lost her job and they couldn't pay rent. As Sarah helped them get settled, she learned that Jessica was a good student who had been working part-time to help her mother pay bills. She reminded Sarah of herself at that age, responsible, determined, and worried about her family's future. "I want to finish high school," Jessica told Sarah, "but I don't know how I can keep up with my grades when we don't have a stable place to live." "You'll finish high school," Sarah said firmly, "and if you still want to be a nurse after that, I'll help you figure out how to make it happen." Over the next few months, Sarah became a mentor to Jessica, just as David had been a mentor and father figure to Emma. She helped Jessica with her studies, drove her to school when needed, and talked to her about the nursing program at the local community college. Linda found a job as a store clerk and was able to save enough money to rent a small apartment. But even after they moved out of the shelter, Jessica continued to visit Sarah regularly, and Sarah continued to support her education. "You're doing for Jessica what David did for me," Emma observed one day as they were driving home from the shelter. "And what you're doing for the other kids at the shelter," Sarah replied. "That's how kindness works. It keeps moving forward, from person to person." As the years passed, the Morrison Family Shelter became a model for other communities. Social workers and city officials from other towns came to visit and learn how to create similar programs. Sarah and David were invited to speak at conferences about their approach to helping homeless families. But for them, the real measure of success wasn't the awards or recognition. It was the families who moved from the shelter into stable housing, the children who continued their education, and the parents who found jobs and rebuilt their confidence. Emma graduated from high school as valedictorian and received a full scholarship to study pre-med at the State University. In her graduation speech, she talked about how her parents had taught her that helping others isn't just something you do, it's who you are. Miguel, now 10 years old, was already talking about becoming an engineer like his father and helping build more shelters in other cities. He had started a school project to collect winter coats for homeless children, and he was determined to make sure no kid ever had to be cold the way his sister had been. David's engineering business grew, and he was able to hire other engineers to help him design shelters and affordable housing projects. He still remembered being a 5-year-old immigrant who sometimes went to bed hungry, and he was determined to use his success to help other struggling families. The shelter had helped over 200 families in its first 5 years. Some stayed for just a few weeks while they got back on their feet. Others needed months of support to rebuild their lives. But every family left with more than they had when they arrived, and not just material things, but hope, dignity, and the knowledge that they weren't alone. Jessica graduated from nursing school and came to work at the hospital alongside Sarah. She often told people that Sarah had saved her life by believing in her when she couldn't believe in herself. "That's what people did for me," Sarah would always reply. "That's what people should do for each other." 20 years after that cold night in the warehouse, Emma was finishing her medical residency and planning to specialize in pediatrics. She had met a wonderful man named James during medical school, and they were planning to get married the following summer. Miguel was in high school now, captain of the debate team and volunteering at the shelter every weekend. He had grown up surrounded by stories of resilience and kindness, and he seemed to naturally understand that helping others was just part of how families like theirs lived. Sarah and David, now in their 50s, were still running the shelter and still deeply in love. They had weathered challenges over the years, financial difficulties, health scares, and the normal ups and downs of marriage and parenthood, but they had faced everything together. One evening, as they were having dinner with Emma and Miguel, Emma shared some news. "James and I have been talking about the future," she said, "about what we want to do after I finish my residency." "And?" David asked. "We want to start a mobile medical clinic for homeless families. Something that can go to different areas of the city, providing health care to people who can't get to regular doctors." Sarah felt her heart swell with pride. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. We were hoping," Emma continued, "that you might want to be involved. Maybe help us with the planning and fundraising." Sarah and David looked at each other and smiled. Their daughter was carrying on their legacy of helping others, but in her own way, with her own ideas and dreams. "We'd love to help," David said. "And I want to design the clinic," Miguel added. "I've been thinking about how to make a medical van that's really efficient and comfortable for families." Sarah looked around the table at her family, the daughter she had almost lost, the son who had been born into love and security, and the man who had saved them all and then spent his life helping others do the same. "You know what I think?" she said. "I think that cold night 20 years ago wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of everything." 30 years after David found Sarah and Emma in the warehouse, the Morrison family shelter had grown into a network of 5 shelters across the state. Emma and James were running their mobile medical clinic, which had served thousands of homeless individuals and families. Miguel had become an engineer and was designing affordable housing projects in major cities across the country. The original warehouse had been transformed completely. Where Sarah had once held Emma and prepared to die, there was now a bright, warm lobby with children's artwork on the walls and the sound of families rebuilding their lives. Sarah, now a grandmother to Emma's twin daughters, still worked part-time at the hospital and spent her free time mentoring young mothers at the shelter. David had officially retired from engineering but couldn't stay away from the shelter. He was there almost every day, helping with maintenance, talking to families, and making sure everyone felt welcome. One cold winter evening, as Sarah was leaving the shelter after a long day, she stopped in the lobby to look at a new photo display that Miguel had created. It showed pictures of all the families who had stayed at the shelter over the years, with updates on where they were now. There were photos of children who had grown up to become teachers, doctors, mechanics, and artists. There were pictures of parents who had gone back to school, started their own businesses, or found stable jobs. There were wedding photos, graduation photos, and pictures of new babies born to families who had once been homeless. In the center of the display was a photo of Sarah, David, Emma, and Miguel taken on the shelter's 10th anniversary. They were all smiling, surrounded by dozens of the families they had helped over the years. Below the photo was a simple plaque that read, "In memory of one cold night that changed everything, and in celebration of all the warm days that followed." As Sarah read those words, she thought about how one act of kindness, David's decision to check on a broken streetlight, had created ripples that were still spreading 30 years later. Every family they had helped, every child who had grown up safe and loved, every person who had learned that they mattered. All of it traced back to that moment when David chose to stop and look for whoever might need help. She walked outside into the winter evening, no longer afraid of the cold. Her car was warm, her house was warm, and most importantly, Her heart was warm with the knowledge that even in the darkest moments, hope could survive and grow and change the world. Behind her, in the bright windows of the shelter, she could see families sitting down to dinner together, children doing homework at the big table in the common room, and parents talking quietly about their plans for the future. Tomorrow, there would be new families arriving, new stories of struggle and hope, new chances to prove that kindness was stronger than despair. And Sarah would be there, along with David and their children and all the volunteers who had caught the vision of what was possible when people decided to help each other. The warehouse that had once been a place of desperation was now a place of hope. And the woman who had once wrapped her baby and closed her eyes to die was now helping other mothers believe that they could survive, that they could build better lives, and that they were never as alone as they thought. In the end, Sarah realized, we are all connected by invisible threads of kindness and compassion. And sometimes, when we're brave enough to reach out to a stranger in need, we discover that we're not just helping them, we're helping ourselves become the people we were always meant to be. The story that began with a mother's love and a stranger's kindness had no ending, because kindness never ends. It just keeps moving forward, from heart to heart, generation to generation, creating warmth in a cold world one act of love at a time. 50 years had passed since that frozen night when death seemed certain. Sarah, now 75, sat in her favorite chair by the window of the original Morrison family shelter, watching the snow fall gently outside. Her hair was silver now, her hands marked by decades of caring for others, but her eyes still held the same fierce love that had kept Emma alive through that terrible night. David, at 80, moved more slowly but still insisted on greeting every new family that arrived at the shelter. First impressions matter, he would say, his voice still warm with the kindness that had saved 2 lives so long ago. Emma, now a renowned pediatrician and director of the city's largest children's hospital, had never forgotten the lesson of that night, that love could overcome impossible odds. She had dedicated her career to helping children in crisis, establishing free clinics in underserved communities and training other doctors to see their patients as whole human beings, not just medical cases. Miguel had become more than an engineer. He was a visionary who had revolutionized affordable housing design. His Hope Villages, communities of tiny homes for families transitioning out of homelessness, now existed in over 20 states. Each village included childcare centers, job training facilities, and community gardens where residents could grow their own food and their own sense of pride. But today was special. Today marked the 50th anniversary of the night that changed everything, and the shelter was hosting its largest celebration ever. Hundreds of people had come, former residents who were now teachers, business owners, nurses, and parents themselves, volunteers who had found their calling in service, and supporters who had learned that helping others was the surest path to their own fulfillment. The evening began with Sarah telling the original story to a group of children from the current shelter families. She had told this story thousands of times over the years, but it never lost its power. "Your mama loves you so much that she will never give up on you," Sarah told a little girl who reminded her of Emma at that age. "And there are people in this world who will help you when you need it most, even if they don't know you yet." Emma stood at the back of the room, listening to her mother tell their story. At 45, she was pregnant with her 3rd child, a surprise that had filled the whole family with joy. Her daughters, now teenagers, volunteered at the shelter every weekend, continuing the family tradition of service. Miguel, now 35 and married to a social worker he had met at the shelter, brought his twin boys to visit their grandparents every day. The boys, 6 years old, had grown up hearing stories about the warehouse and the power of kindness. They couldn't wait to be old enough to help at the shelter themselves. As the celebration continued, person after person shared how the Morrison family shelter had changed their lives. A young man who had arrived as a scared 8-year-old was now a successful lawyer who provided free legal services to homeless families. A woman who had stayed at the shelter with her 3 children 20 years ago was now a social worker herself, helping other mothers navigate the system. But the most moving moment came when a stranger approached Sarah during the reception. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and calloused hands. "Mrs. Chun," she said, "you don't know me, but I want to thank you." Sarah looked puzzled. "I'm sorry," I don't understand. The woman smiled. 25 years ago, you helped my sister and her baby when they stayed here. My sister used to call me crying every night, telling me about this nurse who made her feel like she mattered, who helped her believe she could build a better life. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. What happened to your sister? She became a teacher. She married a good man. She raised 3 beautiful children who are all adults now with families of their own. She died last year from cancer, but she lived a full, happy life because of the hope you gave her here. The woman reached into her purse and pulled out a worn photograph. It showed a young mother holding a toddler, both of them smiling in front of the shelter's entrance. She asked me to find you if anything ever happened to her. She wanted you to know that the kindness you showed her kept going. Her children grew up knowing they should help others. Her oldest daughter is a nurse now, working with homeless veterans. Her son teaches at-risk kids. Her youngest is studying to be a social worker. Sarah took the photograph with trembling hands. She remembered the woman, Jennifer, who had been so scared when she first arrived, but had blossomed into confidence during her 3-month stay. She wanted you to know, the woman continued, that you didn't just save her life. You saved her children's lives, and their children's lives, and all the lives they'll touch in the future. As the evening wound down, for generations of the Chin family stood together outside the shelter. The building glowed with warm light, and through the windows, they could see families settling in for the night, safe, warm, and surrounded by hope. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't seen that broken streetlight? David asked, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. No, Sarah replied firmly, because I know you would have found some other way to help us. That's just who you are. Emma smiled at her parents. And I know that if it hadn't been you, Dad, it would have been someone else. Because that's what people do. They help each other. You taught us that. Miguel nodded, holding his own children close. And we'll teach our kids, and they'll teach theirs. As they walked to their cars, Sarah looked back at the shelter one more time. In the lobby window, she could see a young mother reading a bedtime story to her child, both of them safe and warm and full of possibility. The circle was complete, but it was also just beginning. Somewhere in the city, there was probably another mother holding her child, scared and cold and thinking that hope was gone. But tomorrow someone would find her. Someone would help her. Someone would prove that even in the darkest moments, love was stronger than fear. Sarah smiled and walked into the gentle snow, knowing that the warmth they had created together would never fade. It would keep spreading, from heart to heart, generation to generation, forever and always. The story that began with a mother's love and a stranger's kindness had become something bigger than any of them could have imagined. A legacy of hope that would warm the world long after they were gone.